At the outset, on behalf of Team CASA, I wish you all and your families a very happy and healthy new year. I welcome you all to CASA's 22nd webinar, China Watching, How Crucial is 2022? The festivities this year, as well as last year, were muted or simply non-existent across the world, thanks to the Wuhan virus, which, as we all know, was renamed COVID-19, thanks in no small measure to the influence that China wields in the WHO. As governments across the world went on a war footing to contain its spread and prevent their economies from tanking, China actually used this calamity to flex their muscles across the LAC and in the South China Seas. Apart from causing deep apprehension to their adversaries, these last 2 years saw China succeed in making their friends suspicious and caused grave misgivings amongst their supporters. This behavior, characterized by the wolf warrior diplomacy, is said to be a direct result of Xi Jinping's asserting himself in the hierarchy of the CCP and eliminating opposition to his position. Later this year, China and the world will closely watch the deliberations of the CCP, which would be holding its 20th National Party Congress, shaking up the top echelon of Chinese politics. So either Xi Jinping stays on for a third term, unprecedented in recent history, or he is dismissed by internal CCP factions and his political power neutered during this year. To speak to us on China in 2022 and what it portends for the rest of the world, we have three distinguished China watchers. Our first speaker of the evening is Professor Srikant Kondapalli, who is a professor in Chinese studies at the Jawaharlal Nehru University. He is also an honorary fellow at the Institute of Chinese Studies, Delhi, and research associate at the Center for Chinese Study, University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. He served at the IDSA for nearly 12 years. He's educated in Chinese studies in both India and China. He learned Chinese and was a postdoctoral visiting fellow at the People's University, Beijing from 96 to 98. He's a visiting professor at the National Cheng Chi University, Taipei in 2004. He's published 3 books, 2 monographs, co-edited a volume and several articles in edited books and in national and international journals. He's presented several research papers at national and international conferences in India and abroad, and lectured at India academic, defense and media establishments. We welcome Professor Kondapalli and look forward to sharing his deep insights with us. Our next speaker is Mr. Sunil Pant, who is an independent director, Board of Supervision, Ghaznafar Bank in Kabul, Afghanistan. The bank has been floated by leading business houses of Afghanistan and its head office at Kabul with networks spread across all provinces. Apart from his deep knowledge of Afghanistan, Mr. Pant has been closely following developments in China, especially related to economy and finance. He was a senior banker with highly diversified exposure. He retired in December 23 as the Chief General Manager, Financial Control, after 37 years in the State Bank of India. He's an independent director in a few companies, a postgraduate in physics with an honors degree in statistics, degree in law, and a certified associate of the Indian Institute of Bankers with a fellowship from the All India Management Association. He writes frequently for various newspapers and magazines on banking, financial, and geostrategic matters. We welcome Mr. Pant and look forward to hearing his views on where the Chinese economy and the financial sector is headed this year. Our third speaker is none other than our redoubtable Lieutenant General P.R. Shankar, PVSM, AVSM, VSM retired. General Shankar retired as the Director General of our artillery. He's an alumnus of the NDA Khadakwasla, DSSC Wellington, the Army War College Mao, the Naval Postgraduate College Monterrey, and the National Defense College New Delhi. He's held many important command, staff, and instructional appointments in the Army and has had vast operational experience, having served in all kinds of terrain and operation situations. He gave great inputs for the modernization of the artillery through indigenization. General Shankar is now a professor in Aerospace Department of IIT Madras. He's actively involved in applied research and writes and speaks extensively on strategic issues. He has his own blog called Gunner's Shot, which is widely read with around 5 lakh hits per month. For the last 2 years or so, General Shankar has been studying China in great depth and has been speaking as well as writing very incisively on China. We welcome you, General Shankar, and look forward to your threadbare analysis of China. Our moderator for the evening is Lieutenant General Satish Dua, PVSM, UISM, SMVSM, who retired as the Chief of Integrated Defense Staff that was responsible for synergizing capability development, perspective planning, and jointness amongst the Army, Navy, and the Air Force. A counterterrorism specialist, General Dua was a corps commander in Kashmir during the tumultuous years of 2015-16, defined largely by the surgical strikes. He's commanded his battalion as well as his brigade in active militancy in J&K on the line of control. As a major general, he raised a new counterterrorism division of the Assam Rifles in the Northeast called IGR East. The general has been a commando instructor as a captain and an Indian defense attaché in Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos as a colonel. He's held important appointments earlier in the Army headquarters dealing with capital and revenue procurement of weapons and equipment. So without further ado, I hand over to our moderator, General Satish Dua, to carry on with the rest of the proceedings. Over to you, General Dua.
Thank you very much, General Murthy, sir. And good evening to all of you, and good day to those who are from the other time zones. I think my attire would show that here in Delhi, it's a cold day. It's been the wettest January day, one single day's rainfall that we've had over here, and is adding to the winter chill. But this is not the only thing that's adding to our chill. The events in the past couple of years that have unfolded in the region, and in fact, that are affecting the entire world. We are talking about how, the word to be used is perhaps belligerent. In a belligerent manner, China is moving towards its stated aim of unseating the United States as the number one power. They seem to have defined and advanced the timelines they had set for themselves to do this. And especially under Xi Jinping, we are seeing an indecent haste, both in time and in the methods being employed, used, tactics, strategy being employed or used to get there. Closer home, while the whole world is feeling the brunt of this in some way or the other, others are watching from the sideline, but closer home, in the summer of 2020, we've had a face-off in Ladakh, which is continuing. And we see that as far as China is concerned, China has land borders with 14 countries, and it has resolved the borders with all of them except India. So is this to a plan? Is this to keep India on the hook to be able to up the ante when they want to do it? And many more such questions come to our minds. We discuss them in various fora. And today, we hope to be enriched by the three speakers and the questions raised by all of you. The speakers have been introduced. I'm not going to take much time on that. And so may I invite Professor Shrikant Kondapalli to please begin to set the ball rolling, so to speak. And he will be covering domestic issues as well as foreign policies. Over to you, Professor.
Thank you, General Dua. Greetings to the fellow panelists, General Murthy, Mr. Mahadevan, Mr. Sunil Pant, and General Shankar, and to the 60-odd participants assembled today or in this webinar. Let me thank the CASA, the Current and Strategic Affairs Forum, for organizing 21 webinars previously, and let me wish the CASA all success in the future efforts. Now, the discussion today is on China and what do we expect from 2022, in 2022. What are the developments that have happened in 2021 and likely impact in the 2022 this year. So briefly, let me begin with the domestic scenario in China, which is crucial for us to understand the other aspects. So the Central Economic Work Conference that was held last month that was completed its session on December 10th last year. It mentioned that the ensuring stability for 2022 is the primary mission of China. So this is in the light of the demand contraction, supply shocks, and weakening expectations in the economy and in other spheres. So the economy grew during the 2020 at 2.3%, and last year, while we don't have the full figures available, it is estimated to grow at 5.1%. So this is considered to be medium high generally in the Chinese economic growth pattern. In the 1990s, they grew at 14%. By 2010, they had an on average 10% growth rate. And since then, there is a decline to the 6%, 7%, 8%, and 2.3% in 2020, and expected 5.1% last year. So in this sphere, the supply chain disruptions have happened because of the COVID-19 related pandemic. So there is a huge problem for China. It is estimated by the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences that for every 1% decline in growth rate, there will be about roughly 8 million unemployed in China. So we have seen from 10% to 2.3 or 5%. So that is a huge decline, nearly 5 to 6% growth rate decline. Assuming these figures are correct, official figures are correct, we see a huge unemployment in China. Second, of course, with the COVID-19 and the disruptions, you may have seen in December, China had locked down Xi'an, which is 13 million people. Many aerospace industries are located in Xi'an and other industries as well. They have all been shut down. Last month also saw the Zhejiang province shut down. 500,000 people were put under COVID-19 restrictions. And here is Foxconn, which manufactures the iPhones. Here is also the Huawei company's headquarters in Hangzhou, the capital city of Zhejiang province. In Shenzhen as well, there has been a lot of restrictions on this. And so there is a reduction in the manufacturing sector contribution to the GDP. So that is one. But the longer term, they have decided in the 14th five-year plan, which is being implemented from last March, of becoming a superpower. General Dua mentioned about China replacing the United States. So they are going systematically in this regard. And they identified about 11 subjects like manufacturing superpower, cyber superpower, culture superpower, sports superpower, and talent superpower, economic superpower, trade superpower, and so on and so forth. About 11 subjects have been identified in this. And also the Made in China 2025, nearly 80% of the high-tech products will be sourced from within China without depending on the external scenario. In fact, today, China is importing more chips than it is importing oil or other iron ore or other minerals or resources. So in other words, the IT related is becoming very crucial. And General Dua mentioned about the competition between US and China. It is also reflected in the IT industry in terms of the semiconductor. The audience would probably know about the Meng Wanzhou case in Canada and the release simultaneously of the two Michaels, Canadian citizens, in this swap diplomacy that happened last year. So China's economy is not doing well with these indicators. But there is also a lot of projections they made. $5 trillion to be invested in the digital infrastructure since last year. Second, they have about $15 trillion in terms of the projects for renewable energy, solar, wind, and a host of others by 2050. So there is a state-led investment that is being carried forward, which of course is problematic from the point of view of generating demand, which is where the problem also lies in Chinese economy. Domestic demand is estimated at around 53% of the GDP. If you have to grow, if you want to grow to be a developed country, then you have to have at least 70 to 80% domestic consumption. But that's a far cry in China, and this is where the problem lies for China's economy. In India, we consume about 59, 60%. And so the relatively more sustainable growth rates in India. So the restrictions that Chinese government put forward last year, fintechs, edtechs, car hailing apps, and real estate, this has created a lot of problem, and 1.4 trillion has been washed away from the Chinese market due to these restrictions. And this is doubled up with the Evergrande and other real estates crashing in China. And they were asked to even demolish many of the buildings that they have constructed. So this is one. But there are also some bright spots like the FDI. China attracted the largest FDI last year and in 2020, displacing the US in that field. And also China became the largest investor abroad with $153 billion last year, even during the COVID-19 disruption times. So this suggests that there is some shoots that China has. This is in the light of the Gini coefficient that is increasing income inequalities, etc. in China. Premier Li Keqiang mentioned about 600 million people, that's about 40% of the people in China, living at $140 per month. That's roughly about, say, 9 or 10,000 rupees a month. So that is huge problem, even though China boasts of $10,500 per capita. So in the light of this, the key issue in 2022 is from March onwards, there will be a lot of political drama and political infighting between different factions in China on the 20th Party Congress that is to be held somewhere in October this year. And this is a once in a 5-year Congress, and the Party Congress decides the policy for the next 5 years. Although 14th 5-year plan, as we discussed, will have some impact on the outcome of this Party Congress. Nevertheless, it is also important that, as General Dua mentioned, there is the third term that is expected for Xi Jinping, because in the 6th plenary session last year, they decided to give more leeway to President Xi Jinping. So it is likely that he will cross, even though he will cross the 68 years norm for a Politburo Standing Committee member, it is likely that he probably will get a third term, which means that 6th generation leader would be problematic in China. And there are many like Hu Chunying, Chen Min'er, and a few others who have actually come up to become the 6th generation leaders, but were not given the chance to go forward in the previous 19th Party Congress. So the Communist Youth League, the Princeling faction, the new Zhejiang army that Xi Jinping promotes, these are to be seen in terms of their factional struggles in the near future. Briefly,
Professor Pandapalli, sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
You want to take a couple of minutes to just wrap up, and then we'll come back on the Q&A on the other aspects of it.
Yes. So briefly, to also reflect on the external, the last month, the Chinese foreign minister released the Diplomacy in 2021, where he mentioned about the emerging Cold War between China and the United States. So that is in the background, but we will probably see more action on Taiwan Straits, South China Sea, with the Indonesians also joining the tussle in South China Sea when they began last July on drilling in Natuna gas fields. And so there is a huge problem in the South China Sea. China had introduced a domestic legislation that any vessel which is passing through will have to open up their board, the ship, for inspections. So this is a new law that has come about in September, which is going to have some impact, and Quad and the Indo-Pacific would have something up their sleeves in this regard. The third other issue is, of course, the Senkaku Islands, where there is some 680 transgressions reported by the Chinese Coast Guard and the Chinese Air Force. While China had suggested that it had exported 88 million doses of the vaccines to different countries, still this is a big issue in international politics today on loss of soft power for China because of this COVID pandemic expanding from Wuhan to the rest of the world, with 5 million casualties so far and nearly 300 million infections. So in the background of Foreign Minister Wang Yi's visit to the Indian Ocean this week, to Maldives and Sri Lanka, we should expect more in terms of the Pacific Ocean, Indian Ocean thrust in the foreign policy of China. In addition, of course, the international profile is increasing as we saw the Chinese joining the WTO as DDG and various other, some 15 UN organizations. Nevertheless, there is the Beijing Winter Olympics boycott, which is on cards from the next month, and this is going to test the international image of China. One bright spot for China is the China-Russia relations. Recently, Putin and Xi Jinping met on the virtually. This is the 37th meeting since 2013 takeover by President Xi Jinping. This comes in the background of the Kazakhstan developments, and China and Russia are supporting President Tokayev in this regard. There is a lot that that can be discussed on Turkmenistan and Kazakhstan in terms of the energy flows to China and the factors responsible for this. So just to wind up this brief discussion, let me say that the neighborhood policy in Afghanistan, in India, these are expected to become much more focused in China's foreign policy, not least because of the land border law that was introduced. And from January 1st this year, this will be under implementation. I would be happy to answer questions on these aspects. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Professor. That was excellent. I mean, I know you perhaps couldn't do justice to the topic because of the lack of time, but we hope to make it, make up for it in the quick Q&A session. And while I'll not ask you to answer now, let me pose a quick question to you. And I think that's where you wanted to expand on till you were reminded about the time. This is about the internal dissensions, as we spoke about the upcoming party conference, I beg your pardon, Congress. What is your prognosis? How do you see this panning out? How do you see the dissensions and the pulls and pressures, whether they're likely to be in favor of Xi Jinping or not? I mean, I understand it's tough to make a predict anything like that, but we'll be happy to hear your views over possibilities on the subject. Once again, thank you very much, Professor. A country wants to be a superpower or not, country is a military power or not, or it wants to get there. But for everything, we require mullah, finances, economy. And I think to hear about this interesting side of it, We couldn't have asked for anyone better than Mr. Sunil Pant. You all heard about his credentials and his long years and decades of experience in this field. We are, of course, Mr. Pant, we are really benefited by your views on the group, and we look forward to hearing your views on the economy and the finance as it concerns China. I don't want to remind you again, but you would have got the hint. Request you to keep it restricted to the allotted time, sir, and then we'll take up the rest in the Q&A. Over to you, Mr. Pant.
Thank you very much, sir. It was nice and pleasant to hear such good words being said. And first of all, let me wish you and the panelists and the participants, the audience, a very happy new year, and slightly belated, of course, but a great 2022 after the very gray kind of 2021 that we have gone through. Now, with that, I think, it also sort of points towards kind of picture that we have of China. China has been an enigma, and an enigma in a lot of ways, including when I talk about finance, their numbers. Their numbers have never been very clear. In fact, even the GDP numbers that they come out with have been often very hotly disputed. And there have been various schools of thought which have said that they have been over-reporting the numbers to the extent of almost about 40%. And another school of thought, which very interestingly includes our own Mr. Arvind Subramaniam, ex-CEA, who felt that they were actually under-reporting the numbers by a margin of about 40%. So one doesn't really know what exactly are the numbers that we are talking about. I remember when I was looking at China, when I was in the bank, I was in the international banking group. We used to be looking at the NPAs in the Chinese banks, which were at that time running often at the level of about 40 to 50%. Now that is a recipe for disaster. But the Chinese were very good marketers. They were able to sell off slices of that bank, small shares in that bank, to foreign investors who were falling over themselves in the early 2000s to buy something into some kind of a Chinese equity in the banking sector. And they were able to sell shares built up on basically sentiment and on hope, and they were able to raise a lot of money with which they were able to clear out their NPAs. So their NPAs are actually funded by a lot of foreign investors. And that's the way they went at that particular point in time. Even today, when you look at it in terms of the growth that has taken place in China, much of it has been funded by SOEs, that is state-owned enterprises, and they have in turn been funded by provincial governments to a great extent. And there we again find that there is an estimated 14 trillion yuan, which would be maybe in the current exchange rate, somewhere close to about $2 trillion of bad debts, largely bad debts. It's the kind of money that they're still carrying, but it's supposed to be substantially NPA. So that again is an issue which has not really been focused on, which has not really come up, and which will have to be dealt with in due course as the Chinese economy stops generating the kind of margins that it has and has the capacity or continues to have the capacity to brush things under the carpet. As it is now, they are under greater scrutiny. There was a time when they were the darlings of the entire globe. They were looked upon as people who were coming out of a very hoary past, very, very desperate past after their long march and after all their famines and after all the desperations that they went through. And everybody was encouraging them to join the global community as responsible members. Now it appears that perhaps that you may have been over optimistic. And as things stand today, people are viewing China with some kind of concern and definitely some kind of a cold, hard stare. So with that in view, we have to now look at Chinese numbers and see where they go. I'm talking more about numbers because essentially, when we look at 2022 and the prospects that are there for China, we need to base it on something. And I think a number basis would be a slightly better basis than just a kind of an analogous or a kind of an impressionistic basis. Looking at that again, what we are looking at is, if we look at it, I mean, very significantly, one of the things that really made the headlines last year was the real estate bubble that the Chinese had walked into. And that was something that had been building up for a long time, since about 2008. I remember in 2008, when we had the global financial meltdown, we were looking at the kind of model that the Chinese were going to adopt to be able to come out of it. And we were also working on the Indian model. And at that time, India took the consumption route. We had, of course, got two benefits at that point in time. We got about a 60 lakh crore release in terms of the sixth pay commission. And we also had done a farm loan waiver of about 60 lakh crores, which made people eligible for further funding. So that gave a kind of stimulus, and we were able to get through that crisis period of 2008, 2009, riding on the consumption surge that we were able to generate. The Chinese, in fact, went in for an investment-based opportunity, where they put in about $600 billion worth of investments in real estate. And they were looking at, as they said, future-proofing their economy. And they were actually overbuilding. So you had flyovers to nowhere. You had cities that became host cities. There was a lot of infrastructure construction that took place, a huge infrastructure. I don't know if any of you have traveled by train from Beijing to Shanghai, and you come across all these ghost cities on the way. And that was slightly scary at times. But then they were able to stimulate demand. They were able to get employment, and they were able to then come out of that difficult situation in the manner in which they had sought to get out of it. Now, coming back to where we are, with that kind of investment that we saw, with the kind of panacea that was expected to be provided by the real estate sector, there has been a huge amount of money that has been raised out of it. In fact, almost about 20% of state funding has come out of the real estate sector. And that is why the states, the provinces and the center there have been so keen on developing the real estate. But that has also led to a situation where there has been overheating in that area. And as a consequence, there has been a huge amount of debt that has been created, very high housing prices. And that led to a situation where the government decided to crack down on the real estate companies, because they felt that the margins that they were charging and the prices that they were levying were inordinately high. That was also conflicting with the policy that the Chinese now had of encouraging people to have bigger families. But then they found that people were not being able to have bigger families because of the fact that the cost of having a family, of sustaining a family and children, was getting to be so high. So you see that all the linked sectors there are the sectors that came in some kind of, I will not say disgrace, but came to some kind of attention by the Chinese. And that is where they started pushing. One was the education sector. You can see that the Chinese really pushed hard on the education sector, particularly after school classes and the tutorials and the tuitions that people were taking. And that is a huge industry out there, particularly with tiger moms pushing the kids into university and good schools and the upper end of the education system. The other was in terms of housing, because people needed houses to stay. That was in fact one of their major equities because of the weak social infrastructure that was there and the sustenance that could be there. Therefore, housing became a bubble that became very difficult to support. And finally, when the Chinese decided that the bubble was getting to be one that could actually have a very significant impact on the economy, and they decided to crack down on it, we have got this kind of a problem. Now, there are two ways of looking at it. One is that this problem is not going to go away. The other is that the Chinese, being very shrewd, very calculative kind of people, have probably gamed the system. They've worked on it in such a way that they will be able to raise the funds to be able to get around it. The options there could be sort of seen in the form that Evergrande has the route that Evergrande has taken and Hurong took. Hurong was substantially supported by the government because it was lending more to the SOEs. But Hurong had also got a higher debt than Evergrande. But Evergrande was permitted to go through a very bad phase, though I am told, I understand, that the government is indirectly trying to help Evergrande also, because they can't really afford to have such a major crash or a failure that comes up. So we are going to be seeing some kind of an interesting revival of certain sectors without the government directly sort of putting its neck on the line on that. But in terms of how they are able to work out the policy and the systems to be able to support those sectors. So that is one thing that we have to see. And we have to also look at the fact that originally the urbanization that was held, that was encouraged, did help the economy grow. Almost about 30% of China's GDP is contributed by the real estate sector, which is almost twice the position that is there in the US, and maybe about 3 to 4 times the position that is there in India. So we have a situation where China now has come to a point where further investment in real estate and in infrastructure may not really be as productive as it was because of the fact that it is already over stimulated.
Mr.
Now,
Pant, 2 minutes to go.
Okay, fine. So that is going to be something that one will need to see. The other is that state revenues. That state revenues are again going to be very difficult to sustain. There is 1/3 of the local government revenues is derived from land sales, and another 10 to 15 comes from related taxes on development. Now that is again drying up. The other area that we have been looking at is in terms of the crackdown on new enterprises. In his zeal to reassert the dominance of the Chinese Communist Party, Mr. Xi has engineered a crackdown on some of China's most, shall we say, advanced technology enterprises. And that is again going to be very difficult to support as things go forward, because unless there is this kind of enterprise, you're not going to see new businesses coming up. The clampdown on new industries such as ride sharing, private education, social media, and online and private healthcare is especially damaging to growth. Because Xi Jinping is privileging the less productive and less innovative sectors of the Chinese economy. He's also going back to encouraging the public sector enterprises there, because he's trying to now push back on the public sector side of it, or rather, he's trying to push the public sector forward versus the private sector. Now that again needs to be seen whether they will be able to maintain the kind of efficiencies. In terms of even advanced semiconductors, for instance, the stop, that is the block that is there on supply of semiconductors into China, has heavily gutted Huawei's ability to make its own 5G telephones. China's semiconductor industry is about 10 years behind that of the world leaders, according to a recent German study. So again, there are going to be issues on that. In terms of competitiveness also, in terms of the high end of the market, particularly airlines, for instance, China does not have that kind of competitive ability to take on Airbus or Boeing. So there is going to be some kind of a problem coming up in that sector also. You also got the alleged lead that they have in artificial intelligence could be blunted by imposing the same limits on data flow into China that is it imposes internally. So there could be that kind of a problem coming up there again. And then overall productivity levels are also now starting to lag those of advanced economies. So that is something that we need to see. In short, it appears that to escape, it's difficult to escape the conclusion that China's economy is systematically weakening, and that Mr. Xi's new priorities offer little hope for a quick turnaround. The US and its allies could further compound Mr. Xi's problem by vigorous enforcement of trade laws, limiting Chinese access to technology and finance from the West, and by imposing sanctions upon China, against China in terms of brutal human rights abuses in Xinjiang and in other countries in the developing world that are now facing the brunt of the debt, as they say, diplomacy of China. So there's going to be something that is quite a worrying area: human rights, the upkeep, the maintenance of environment, particularly looking at the key components that are being mined in Africa and South America for cobalt, by way of cobalt and lithium, for the battery manufacturers that are there in China. So that these are all issues that are sort of coming together, and therefore 2022 seems to be a difficult year, even though this is also Mr. Xi's make or break here. If he is not able to push through things, and that is why the danger, if I may just take it to the military side of it, of a conflict appears to be enlarging actually, because he may need
Sorry,
to divert.
sorry to
Right.
interrupt, Mr.
So
Pant.
thank you, Mr. Pant. So,
I'll
and we'll
conclude
have
here.
General
Thank you.
Shankar speak about the military side. But thank you very much. Sorry for interrupting you there. Um, when you said that if you travel, I have traveled, like you said, from Beijing to Shanghai by train, and I can relate to what you spoke about, those ghost cities and the huge infrastructure, like the way you said, a flyover to nowhere. It is interesting because Professor Kondapalli also did mention about huge buildings and these things being constructed there. General Shankar's blog today, I'm sure he's going to cover in his talk. He also speaks about this huge infrastructure and the real estate boom which has gone wrong. In fact, the other thing that I caught from your talk is that they are reconsidering some of their policies. If I can just rattle out a couple of them. One is about this real estate. The second is about the one-child policy. The third is also about going back to the public sector, what Xi Jinping is trying. It'll be interesting to see as to how they do overcome this. The last sentence that I would like to say, one got a sense from your talk, Mr. Pant, is that they are reconsidering, they are in some kind of trouble and they have to reconsider. But I think all of us, especially India, we need to take note and never consider the adversary weak. They will have ways of overcoming some of this, and we'll surely discuss that in our Q&A session. Thank you very much. Now I turn to General Shankar. Your blogs are so widely read. I read your today's thing about Newton's law of gravity and what goes up must come down. And I'm sure you're going to talk about all these things and many more. But I'm sure, like Mr. Pant just mentioned, you will also focus, General Shankar, as you should, on the military aspects and our issues in Ladakh. Over to you, General Shankar.
Thanks a lot, General Dua, and a very good evening to everyone. A happy new year to all of us, and my greetings to my fellow panelists. It was Ernest Hemingway who said that how do you go bankrupt? This was in his book, The Sun Also Rises. The story goes two ways, gradually and then suddenly. So what's happening in China? Is it gradual or sudden? That's the question. But whatever is happening is something far different from what we've learned of China for the past 10 years. What's started about 6 months back in the form of a simple thing called the Common Prosperity Drive is now careening into something which we have to watch out for. In my view, China is entering an unstable phase, and this unstable phase is going to affect all of us. And much so, India, which is its main competitor, which is taking away the sheen from China. And we have a huge problem with them militarily, and I will touch upon it a little later down the line. What are the four drivers? We can look at China from many angles, but I have been concentrating on four drivers which are taking China to where it is going. They've been touched upon by Professor Kondapalli and Mr. Pant, but I'll touch upon them and then we'll go to the strategic issues. First is big tech and ed tech. Ed tech is wiped out. Big tech has been emasculated. What has it resulted in? Jobs are gone. Innovation is gone. Creativity is gone. When masters in computer starts looking for a government job, you have to rethink. What's worrying is there is a set of hardline left wingers who are driving this whole story of curbing the big tech. So it's going to be a problem. There are pay cuts out there. People don't want to go into these jobs. And I'm looking at it from a people-centric point of view. Real estate. Well, we all know debt bubbles, ghost cities and all that. But the major thing is that people have invested in it. People have invested it as their life saving. In China, a house is something traditionally a form of great saving. That's going. Whether it's in a debt bubble, it's gone. If it's given into Evergrande, which cannot give a flat, that's also gone. So you're going to have a whole lot of unhappy people. Yeah, there's a lot of speculation going on. A lot of this thing is going on, but this is a fact. Now, big tech and ed tech and real estate, these three or two combined together form 25 to 30% of the Chinese GDP, which were driving the Chinese GDP, investment-driven model as against a consumption-driven model, which Mr. Pant brought out. That's hit. And that's not going to come out in a hurry. That's going to take a couple of years. So for the next couple of years, Chinese economy will not recover the way it was. Okay. Now, when you look at that 5% GDP and 4% GDP, growth rates and all that, there's a report which just came out. India is to grow at 9.2% GDP. For the first time in the last 5 to 6 years, USA is going to grow at a faster rate than China. So where does it leave you? Where does this leave China in terms of overtaking the overall GDP of USA? There are problems, there are huge problems, but they're compounding problem. And this is a long-term problem. They're going to not run away from it, is their declining population. Their marriages are falling off. Their birth rates are falling off a cliff. The number of unmarried males are going up. They're aging the fastest in recorded history, faster than Japan. What Japan is, they're fasting at least 20 to 30% times faster. There's also reports which say that Chinese population is actually only about 1.3 billion or so, not 1.4 billion, which has started shrinking. That means their workforce has started shrinking. They don't have a great social service network for the old people. So there's a problem. And in my opinion, in the next 2 to 3 years, this will start showing up. And once this starts sitting in, China is going to change its character forever. It is this window, the next 3 to 4 years, which is critical for Mr. Xi Jinping or whoever is going to replace him to stabilize China it is. Otherwise, it will be in a permanent decline. A permanent decline is anyway said because of its population alone. The rest of the things just add on. Add to all this is COVID. Mr. Kandopalli spoke about extensive lockdowns and all that. You have to realize that they've got dodgy vaccines and the variants are more, tougher. Not going to do this thing. So there's going to be extensive lockdowns or they're going to be extensive problems, healthcare problems. Either way, the productivity is going to get hit, the economy is going to get hit, and they say the zero COVID policy has become a political statement and there's going to be a heavy price to pay for it. And the price is going up by the day. And this virus is not going to run away. That's the thing. We all know it. We know the misery. We are looking at the third wave and the fourth wave and the fifth wave. It's going to happen. Variants are going to come. There's no end in sight. We have gone past the worst times. China is yet to enter the worst time. Wuhan was not their worst time. There's a balance of China which has not been affected, which is in a lockdown mode. The moment they start opening up, they're going to have into problems. So if you look at all these issues combined with COVID, it's not China which is going to rebound back in a V-shaped thing. This is going to be an L-shaped affair for a long time. Right. What does that leave you with? You have Mr. Xi Jinping, right, who is most probably getting into the third term. But at the same time, there is a following of Deng, Hu Jintao, and Jiang Zemin who are coming up and who are questioning this whole process of what Mr. Xi Jinping has done. He's reversed the process. He's taking the thing back to Mao's time, right? He wants to be a mixture of Mao, Deng, and Gorbachev, who, rather avoid the pitfalls of Gorbachev and avoid the pitfalls of the USSR model, where a collapse took place. He's trying to be all in one. And he's already rewritten his own history in the last Congress, where he said that he is the most influential leader of China. So there is an anti-movement visible, and this movement is going to take its toll. The purge will happen either before or after or both. It doesn't matter whether Mr. Xi Jinping comes or someone else comes into power. This tussle will go on. Till such time this tussle goes on, China will not rebound back to its original shape and size. Right. Now then, where does it leave us? Like what Satish Dua said, you can't underestimate China. China is still a population of 1.4 billion. It's a huge country with a huge economy. It's a resilient economy, right? It'll endure. It'll go through its shocks, but it'll endure. The worrying thing in all this, or rather the thing of concern for all this, is the military and the space expenditure is not reducing. In fact, it is increasing. Every second day you talk of a hyperplane or some 5G or 6G, right? Or a hypersonic missile system or a increase in the nuclear arsenal, the biggest navy on earth. All these are coming in. All these capacities are being taken off. You have Xi Jinping, who's inaugurating a training session of this year. He just did it 2 years back. He's and he's speaking of fighting, and he's speaking of gray rhino events and black swan events, and be prepared to fight. Which means that we have a situation in China where the economy is declining, the military is rising. Where does it leave us? And still the ambition of China to become the world's foremost superpower and to have a rejuvenation of the Chinese nation as also be a committee of the nations, a leader of the committee of nations, right? Like-minded nations, as Xi Jinping put, has not gone. So what does he do? The only logical way, the way I look at it, is that he has to neutralize the influence of USA, at least in the West Pacific, to start with. And how does he do that? The only way he can do that, logical way, is to invade Taiwan and take it over. There's a lot of debate whether he will do it, whether he can do it, whether China is capable of doing it or not doing it, whether it will be too costly or not. But that's the only way. Unless he breaks the first island chain, unless China breaks the first island chain, they don't get access to the deep blue sea. If you have the biggest navy, which is going to hug your shore and sit, it's a waste of time. This biggest navy has to go out, build bases, and keep sea lanes open, control sea lanes, and be, effective. It is only then that Chinese economy can revive back to where it was. It is only then that the BRI can revive. So in the next 3 to 4 years, the interesting question is, can China invade Taiwan and take it one way or the other? The invasion could be political, the invasion could be military. But let's be very clear that China is preparing on both sides to take over Taiwan. If that doesn't happen, what's the next option? The next option is India. They already have a problem. There's already a build-up taking place. We've already had issues. We also know that this, whatever happens between India and China, can't be one big war. It will be a small affair, like it happened in Ladakh, and it will build into a crisis. Now,
Sorry,
again,
General Shankar,
yeah,
2 minutes.
last 2
to
minutes.
Thanks.
Here again, I see, the motive of China will be to neutralize USA. If it can neutralize USA and keep USA out of the equation, then it has established a fact that, look, I'm number one and USA can't interfere with me. And then the region and all their extra regional connectivities can be told, look, we are the greatest and USA can do very little. And our main competitor, India, has been brought to heel. Right? So these are the two dangers which I foresee in the next 2 to 3 years, which will come up. And maybe after 3 to 4 years, this window will also close, because the aging factor would have then come into play, and I don't think China will be able to then do anything more. The next factor which I would like to leave for everyone, all of us to say, history suggests that any person who's taken over in the third term, look at Nixon, look at our own cases, with Mrs. Indira Gandhi, or look at even Pakistan, anyone who's overextended his tenure at the top proves detrimental to his own system and nation. It is history. And that's where Xi Jinping is also probably taking his nation. So what do you see in the end? If I wrap it up, you see a China which is going to be struggling for this best part of this year to regain its mojo. And if it does regain its mojo, it's going to trouble people ahead. I'd leave you with the last final thought. It was in the 60s, 50s, 60s, China had the Great Famine and the Great Leap Forward, disastrous as it was under Mao. They invaded India in 62, despite the famine being at its peak. They undertook the Korean campaign when their economy was fully shot. And they went into Vietnam when they were yet to recover. They were at some of the worst economic times. China historically has been troublesome to all its neighbors when it's economically weak. Today, China is economically weakening. It has got problems, it has got ambitions, and it has got a military which is rising and being super equipped. So will China go to war and trouble Taiwan and India, and followed up by some part of Japan and Australia and the rest, is a fact which we have to be alive to. I will not say that they will do it, but the possibility of doing something or the other is very high. Thank you, and I'll be able to take on any questions which are thrown at me for this. Thanks a lot, Satish.
Thank you, General Shankar. That was interesting, really. We who are used to reading your blogs do know your chain of thoughts, but it's very nice to hear you in person and explain all these aspects. Thanks very much. In fact, like you said, you'll take on the question and answers. I'm sure you want to get some very interesting questions. I'll just straight away launch into the questions. There are several questions that are coming up. I'm going to combine two questions. The first is by General Rajan Kichar, who says India has imported around $88 billion worth of goods from China in the last 11 months. Mr. Pant, this question is coming to you. How do we explain this in the light of present conflict? Any alternatives available? Okay. Having said this, before you take this on, Brigadier Romil Dahiya has, the CASA group has a question on economy. Has some real progress taken place in reducing dependency on imports from China, particularly in electronics and pharma sectors? Over to you, Mr. Pant.
Right. So I think we have to look at it in two different ways. One is in terms of the conflict that is there, and the other is in terms of the commercial sense that a particular transaction makes. In terms of the commercial intertwingling of China and India, that has been there for some time now. And partly I would blame India for that, because we gave up our various processes, we gave up our various manufacturing capabilities, because we found that there was a commercial advantage in moving to China. And having done that, we have not been able to refurbish or again build up the base here. But I think now there is a focus coming back on that, but it will take a bit of time. So for some time, I think as long as India grows, China will benefit from India's growth. And that is hopefully at one time that would have been a kind of a solution for the kind of hostilities we have. I remember reading that when goods don't cross borders, armies will. But in this particular case, the armies seem to be standing neck to neck at the borders while goods are changing hands and they are being traded. So I think maybe this is the new paradigm, but we'll have to be very careful, because we'll have to also see that we build up our own internal dependencies rather than external dependencies. So I think this is something that will happen for some time. We'll not be able to shake it off if we want to remain competitive, because that's the best competitive source we currently have. There is something in the Quad formulation also, if I may use the word, where they have tried to see that they build up supply chains within countries that are sort of democratic in nature, and they are able to build up some kind of mutual support systems that can be there. So that is something that we think will happen, but that is at this moment something that is going forward. So for the present, yes, China's interaction with India as a major supplier for various items is going to be there. I think that will be pruned over time, but it will take a bit of time.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Pant. The next question I have is from Mr. Manoj Mohanka, and this is for Professor Kandipalli. Thank you, Professor. Excellent response. However, does China really care about being called out on the perfidy or violation of agreements? Since you refer to the agreements.
Well, if I can respond, General Dua.
Yes, of course.
Well, the key argument that Dr. Jaishankar is mentioning is we have signed a few protocols before,
Yes.
CBMs on the border. And if you don't abide by these protocols, what is the guarantee that we sign another agreement at the 14th Corps Commander meeting next week and you don't observe those protocols again?
Yeah.
So what is the guarantee? Already the February 10th last year, Defense Ministry's agreement has not been implemented. The agreement says about the de-escalation, disengagement in all friction points. That has not been fully implemented. When we look at the PP10 to PP14 or 17, that has not been implemented. So what Dr. Jaishankar is saying is that we need to have a fresh look at the agreements with China. And in the background of mobilization, military mobilization, and in the background of the infrastructure development and other aspects, including Quad, including other developments that we have seen, we would expect China to behave in the longer term. That is what the expectation is. If they don't, then there are already the entire LAC is militarized. There are an estimated 23 areas where a Kailash range kind of operation can take place.
Right. Thank you. You've left it at a very good point militarily. Kailash range. Someone has asked that question as well, so we'll perhaps get to that. Thank you very much, Professor. In a bit to combine questions earlier, because that was the beginning of the Q&A session, I seem to have missed out an important question from Brigadier Rumel Daya. And I'm going to read that out now. People have been writing obituaries for China's rise, I beg your pardon, writing obituaries of China's rise for a long time, and they continue to grow in all fields. Are these predictions based more on hope rather than serious understanding of what drives China's aspirations? In any case, other countries are not being able to grow their CNP. As a matter of, I beg your pardon, as a result, in comparative terms, China continues to grow. China is also preserving its resources, unlike the US. So any comments on that? I would like to leave it open for who would like to take it on.
Yeah, I can.
All right.
Well, to a certain extent, I agree that China is not going to collapse. All these theories of China collapsing is bunk. I said that earlier. A nation of 1.4 billion people are not going to, finish off this great manufacturing base which has been set up over the past 20 to 30 years, 3 decades, is not going to vanish overnight, right? It just can't happen. And if you've seen the Chinese Communist Party, notwithstanding all the groupings and dissensions and within, they've been relatively stable and smart about how they handle their own affairs. So we are not going to see a China which is going to collapse overnight. But are we going to see a China which is going to keep raising? It's very difficult, right? I don't see that, right? China has had some gravity-defying rise for the past 2 to 3 years, 3 decades. But that rise was predicated on a few issues. The first is that it was an aided rise. The West wanted this rise to take place so that they could, shift their manufacturing bases to China and, get a huge market there. The second part of this is they built it on trust, so that when China, democratizes, as China grows, it will democratize and it will meld with the world. Both these have not happened. And so there's a whole lot of rethink on the way the West is going to deal with China. Already there's a very clear understanding that they're looking at China plus one model. Right. The moment you look at China plus one model, and if the Chinese growth rates, whichever way you look at it, whichever metric you put, goes down by 10 to 15%, China becomes a normal country. Thereafter, and the point which Mr. Pant highlighted, it is an investment-driven model. how much can an investment-driven model sustain growth in the future? It has to be a consumer-driven model. And that consumption is not happening because of the loss of jobs in the education sector, in the real estate sector, which also touches transport and communications and XYZ, plus the fact that COVID effect is taking place and the aging factor. So overall, if you see, you're going to see a dampened China in the future. And that's something we have to, but like I said, the Communist Party and their ideals are a little at variance with what the reality on ground. So we should be prepared for a troublesome China in the future.
Thank you. Well said. Well said, sir. The next question is from Darshan Gajjar to Professor Kondapalli. Sir, at what level the revised national security strategy of Japan, at what level this is the way it's, at what level is the revised national security strategy of Japan and Japan's budgetary increase in defense expenditure poses threat to China, and will it change equations in the Indo-Pacific?
I just explained, but I would like to still, Japan's increase in defense budget is only marginal because they have a constitutional obligation of 1.2% not exceeding of their GDP. So as a result, they spend less. Today, China is spending, or rather allocating officially, 209 billion for its defense sector, while Japan has allocated about $60 billion, slightly less than $60 billion. So you see it is about 1/4 of the Chinese defense spending. So that is not a big issue here, but the Chinese defense outlines, as they call their white papers on defense, they identified PLA modernization as the number third challenge. First is economic security as the number 1 challenge. Number 2 is North Korean nuclear and ballistic missiles as the number 2 challenge. Number 3 is the PLA modernization as the challenge. So in that hierarchy of threats, they have identified these. Now, what we need to remember is in 1894, Japan defeated China and occupied the Korean Peninsula and Taiwan till 1945 Hiroshima Nagasaki incidents. So this is a huge psychological thing for China. It is something like 1962 for Indians. So in the light of this, the Chinese are actually very concerned about the historical experience they had with Japan. And I do not think that even though China has an estimated 1,000 nuclear weapons and several hundred thousands of the ICBMs and IRBMs and MRBMs and SRBMs, so that way they have a superiority over Japan. Nevertheless, Japanese armed forces are highly modernized and highly professional compared to the Chinese armed forces. So this is where they will retaliate. We also are forgetting that the Americans have a nuclear umbrella over Japan as part of the security treaty. So it is, as Obama mentioned to Yomiuri Shimbun, the Senkaku Islands are part of the treaty between US and Japan. So I do not think China will be going to war with Japan. So that is where I just want to stop here.
Thank you. Thank you. I think that is very well explained, especially the last bit. Thanks, Professor. My next question is by Piyush Agarwal. And this is for Mr. Pant. All speakers have alluded to problems in Chinese economy. How will this affect Chinese investments in BRI, Belt and Road Initiative, and infrastructure projects in Asia and Africa?
See, BRI is not very substantial in terms of the total outlay. As of this moment, there is only about $132 billion that the Chinese have earmarked for BRI. And compared to their reserves, which are in excess of $4 trillion, it is not very substantial. In fact, this is one way that China, I think, has adopted of being able to make use of funds that are there, which would have otherwise been used by the US Treasury, to use that in creating an infrastructure network, which gives them not only an economic payback, which is better than the Fed rate, but also gives them a huge amount of political muscle. So with that, I think, feel that this is a win-win situation, and therefore they are going ahead with it. There are already 68 countries that have tied into the BRI, and that has given them enormous leverage in many of these. At least about 20 of these countries, I think, are slightly or significantly beholden to the Chinese, including now as we see Myanmar. So I think as things go forward, we will see the BRI growing. BRI has made a significant place for itself even in Latin America. If you recollect, before the COVID problem came up, the pandemic came up, Italy was very substantially into BRI. It was one of the principal supporters of BRI in Europe. Much of Central Asia is being covered by BRI. And our neighbors, of course, are principal participants, and they have probably benefited to some extent in terms of power supply on other areas like repayments, and by way of the interest rates, they may be having issues. So I think BRI is here, and I think BRI is looked upon by the Chinese as a commercial outlay rather than as an entirely political outlay, and therefore they are also making good money on it. Their rates are commercial, they are charging heavy interest, and that is again leading to the debt diplomacy that they have. So I think overall, I would not put a negative mark on BRI. I think after Marshall Plan, it is one of the biggest reconstruction plans that has been conceived of by any country in the world. Thanks.
Thank you for that, Mr. Pant. But though you also did bring out in the same breath earlier in your intervention that some of their projects are actually, which is within their own country, are not producing as good results as the Marshall Plan did, perhaps. So I'll leave it at that. I don't want to start a discussion on that, but so that's something that we also need to watch together. The next question, and just give me a pause before you answer that, General Shankar. Abhishek Pandey says, since I'm just reading it out the way it is, 20th plenary, 2 Olympics, BRICS in China, geopolitical factors are abound in China this year. Are there any signs of thaw along the border with India? So this is a question from Abhishek Pandey. I'm just going to read out one more question. There is a similar question, I think, for you, for General Shankar. This is from Brigadier Bhalla of our group. China places great store in perception building and has renamed places in Arunachal and also establishing villages along the LAC. What steps should we take as quid pro quo? Should we start a dialogue within the Quad to check ships passing through Malacca Straits, strengthening the Air Force base at Karnik Island, etc.? Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, I don't think there will be, first, the thaw along the LAC will not take place in a hurry, right? They have us on the back foot in terms of negotiations. You're negotiating for space, right? And they say in any real estate dealing, occupation is 90% of the argument, and they have it, like what Professor Kondapalli had said, especially Daksang and North. Now, having said that, well, China is doing its Graysian activities. They'll do all this. All those villages are nothing but bases for tomorrow's offensive or storehouses or staging areas, right? Naming places in Arunachal is part of their thing that, no, this is South Tibet. But we can also play this game. It's not a very great thing. After all, Mansarovar is, in that place, you start calling it yours. You start calling, Brahmaputra, instead of Sangpo, call it Brahmaputra. You can play this game. It's not a big deal. It's only that you need to have the political will to do that. In any case, once this incursion took place in Eastern Ladakh 2 years back, the MOU between India and China, based on which they recognize implicitly Sikkim and we recognize Tibet, has gone. The issue is, will you be able to do it politically and say, look, this is it? In some way, you already started repaying them when our MPs went and attended the Tibetan, event, and the Chinese were forced to react. So it's there, it's both ways. The point is, politically, are you prepared to take a tougher stand? That's the issue. Strengthening Car Nicobar has to be done. There is no two ways about it. And unless we make Andaman Nicobar as a Gad, a fortress which can't be breached, and I'm sure you'll agree with me as a ex-CISC that that's a big ace which we have to play hard. It is not only Andaman Nicobar, I also look at Lakshadweep. The moment you have two bases in the Indian Ocean, you control the Indian Ocean. And if your strategic partnership with USA goes the right way, the third angle of this triangle is Digo Garcia further to the south. Then you're looking at a different paradigm. Are we able to do that? And much of that will depend on how we grow. The 9.2% growth of the Indian economy will lead to that. I'm optimistic.
Okay, good. I agree with you about the strategic advantage that we have in the oceans there. The Andaman and Nicobar Islands dominate the 6-degree and the 10-degree channels. And that's for Malacca Strait, that's the way all the shipping trade goes, and we all know it. But like you said, and I second that, is the question of political will. Military might will follow. It's a question of political will to be able to affect that, because we do have that. So, I mean, the pressure in Ladakh or other places can actually be let off by this, but we get back to the question of will. And so this leads me to the next question, also by Brigadier Bhalla. I didn't want to mix up with the other questions. China is looking at mid-21st century to be fully ready to take on the world-class military. But you feel China may take on the US in 2022 or in near future? What may be their compulsions to take on the US might about quarter of a century before they themselves feel they are ready for such action? And before you answer, I am just going to throw in my one sentence into this. I don't know whether Brigadier Bhalla really meant US the way you look at US, or are you also looking at, other arrangements? Quad comes to my mind first. Are we looking at these arrangements, AUKUS, Quad? Are they part of the same construct as talking about the US individually or singly?
Before we get into this discussion whether China will take on US or not, one thing which is missed out, I would like to put across. We all know that Chinese economy is stagnating. There are talks of stagnation, XYZ. The military and the space are going up. Now, these are expensive hobbies. At this point of time, all modernization in China means new equipment, everything new. What happens a couple of years down the line? They'll need replacement. They'll need training. They'll need expansion. If you have the fourth aircraft carrier comes, you need that much more expansion and that much more navy. That's going to be the costly one, and that is the crunch. The crunch is not in putting new weapons on ground. The crunch in maintaining these old weapons to make it sustain. Will the Chinese economy have the legs to take it through? They have a plan. What will it go through is a thing. Second, if you look at the construct of the PLA Navy, you will see it's still a short-range Navy. It's not a long-range Navy that it can go and dominate, the composition of the oceans. I think there's a long way to go. With this as a background, I don't know whether China will like to take on USA head-on and risk a failure. You see, it's not a matter of whether China will win or not. It's the risk of failure rather than the hope of success which will decide the whole thing. Or rather, it will, like what I said earlier, will it do something against Taiwan, or will it do something against India, to keep USA out of the picture and show it down? That's the indirect method. So these are the options available. So
will it risk, my rejoinder to you is, will it risk an action in Ladakh? Because when I say that, I say it is a considered sentence, a considered question, because even a stalemate between India and China there is a victory for India.
I agree with you completely.
So would it risk getting egg on his face or not? Because
I
at
don't
the
think so.
tactical level, at the tactical battlefield, we will be able to hold our own. That
Yeah,
you and I will
I
be able to.
completely agree with you that anything more than a tactical and maybe a something between tactical and operational, the threshold will stop there, right? Any kind of a conflict between India and China, and we have, like you said, 23 Kailash Rangers are there for us to take action, and that cannot be wished away. So
No,
it'll
but
be-
at that moment, sorry for interrupting, sir. At that moment, we will not have hesitation in using the 6 degree or the 10 degree channel.
yeah, yes.
You see, then everything comes into play.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
then they
everything
risk
comes
it.
into everything comes into play. So the risk factor for a confrontation with India are much lesser. There's also the fact that this rising trade will also go down. So the risk factor with India is much more. In fact, let me put it the other way around. The risk factor for a conflict which China has to undertake is least, with best payoffs in Taiwan, if it can pull it off. The next, in terms of the escalation, is with India, and the last is with USA direct.
Right.
I mean,
General
that's
Dua,
the way
can
I
I-
look at it.
Yeah. So,
Sorry, General Dua, can I throw one question from deep down under here?
Just give me 5
Sure,
seconds
sure.
to make a logistic announcement. General Shankar, and to everyone else present, I'm sorry I read out the last question that I read out to you about India, I beg your pardon, about China wanting to take on the US in 2022, etc. That question was not from Brigadier Bhalla. I was just scrolling down and made a mistake. My apologies. This question was from Captain KK Agnihotri, Senior Fellow of the National Maritime Foundation of India, and author of a book, Leveraging High Technology Developments in the Chinese Military and Maritime Domains. It would be interesting. So I made a mistake there. Yeah. Maddie, over to you.
Yeah, just in line with the theme of how crucial is 2022. Now, China obviously is doing everything that they can. I'll break up my question into two components. One is the geopolitical economic part of it and the military. The military part is AUKUS, which I think General Shankar could touch upon, and the reciprocal agreement with Japan, which just got announced a few days ago. In fact, Ambassador Gurjit Singh, who's in our audience, he also has written a fantastic article about the Japanese-Australian reciprocal agreement and how the mutual logistics service agreement signed 18 months ago between India and Australia. So India, Australia, and Japan have become like a triad locking in the South China Sea. Now, the geopolitical and financial aspect of it for Professor Kondapalli and Mr. Sunil Pant is, with all the 1.4 trillion wipeout that Mr. Kondapalli, Professor Kondapalli touched upon, Mr. Pant spoke about NPAs, Australia has also been witnessing a lot of the economic impact of it. Not just Australia, I would say the region is having the impact of it. So how do you all see 2022 unraveling in terms of RCEP in the ASEAN domain out there? Do you want to go first, General Shankar, on the AUKUS and RAA MLSA?
I think let the economic thing be answered, because the fallout of that will come into the military field.
Economy first.
Yeah.
Professor.
Yeah, like Bill Clinton said, it's economics.
So on the fallout of the real estate and the fintechs, edtechs, so on the economy, I think this is to continue in this year, 2022, before some kind of a balance is to be achieved in the economy in China. Because Xi Jinping launched the Common Prosperity Campaign. As a Beijing economics professor said, it is robbing the rich to help the poor. So Alibaba had announced a $10 billion funding for the common prosperity. Tencent had also announced a $15 billion funding for the common prosperity. Meituan, a food like the Zomato, they have also announced a few $1 billion. So this is likely to continue in 2022 before a certain equilibrium is reached in this economic pressure on these companies, because a decision is taken on common prosperity, and so basically they're going to pinch on the big industry in China. and the medium industry as well. So this is likely to continue in 2022. So on the economic aspect of this, and China can afford this at the moment, even if they wipe out a few $1 trillion, because the state-owned enterprises have something like $50 trillion already raised in terms of savings. China is huge in terms of savings, nearly 40 to 45% savings rate in China. So they have already raised this, so they can afford to do such experiments. But of course, it will, if the economy goes down the hill, probably they will have to revive this whole idea. And the economy can go down the hill if the US-China decoupling process intensifies, because that will be the larger picture in mind. If the 70,000 American companies which have invested in China, they diversify towards Southeast Asia, towards other countries. The Shinzo Abe's plan for 200 some such plans to be shifted from China to Southeast Asia, if that succeeds. If the others' plans also succeed, then possibly there is a huge, because China is heavily dependent on external market for its exports at the moment. And trade constitutes nearly 19% of the GDP of China. So exports constitute 19% of the GDP of China. So they are heavily dependent on this export, and domestic demand is not increasing. So this is a huge X factor which would influence the RCEP and other things, especially in relation to the ASEAN, which is now the largest trading partner for China at around $600 billion last year. So this is one scenario. We do not know, but that is, at the moment, China has deep pockets. They can afford to, with this common prosperity experiment, and squeezing some of these companies like Alibaba, Tencent, and others. So that is my answer on this.
Mr. Pant, just before you kick in with your analysis on the balance of trade between India and China and China's impact on the rest of the region, General Du, I'm just conscious of the time. Shall we extend it by another max 10 minutes to wrap it up, and a couple of more questions? Mr. Pant and then General Shankar.
Yep, we'll give them a closing.
Mr. Pant, over to you.
Thank you. Well, I think China's biggest challenge for 2022 is actually getting people to spend money. The way things are going, it is going to be a very difficult situation, because in the meeting that was there, economic planning meeting that was there late last month, the growth, they said, faces a triple pressure from shrinking demand, supply shocks, and weakening expectations. So that is something that is going to impact China itself. When we talk about China in the context of ASEAN and RCEP, which has come into effect from the 1st of January, we are looking at the entire model being sustained by a rapidly growing and a big economy, a stable economy like China's. If there is some kind of disturbance there, it is going to sort of spread out to the other participant nations also. Now, that is something that we'll have to keep in mind. The other thing that we have to see is that property continues to pose the biggest growth headwind in 2022 also. And that is something that has been talked about, I think, even in the course of this discussion. And again, Macquarie's chief of China, the chief economist there, has also highlighted this point. And that is something that is going to be worrying, because effectively they are expecting a 2% decline in the investments that are taking place in the real estate sector, as against a 4.8% jump that they had at the beginning of last year. So between last year, they had a 4.8%, but they are looking at a decline this year. In fact, even in terms of the GDP growth, it is coming down from 8.5% projected in June to 8.1% that they are looking at in December, and to about 5.1% that is expected for this particular year, with some more pessimistic people saying that it might be only 4.3%. So that's something that we are going to be worrying about and thinking about when we look at China as a part of a big market system, whether it will be able to support the market with the expectations that that market will have in China and its ability to pull the market up. That is something that is there. The other factor that we have to be also looking at is in terms of the policymakers. How are the policymakers going to work out between the various components that are there? Now, everybody is not as strongly aligned to China or has as great an integration with Chinese markets as some others do. And that is something that is going to be having to be seen. And particularly at the time when China is also having some kind of issues in terms of the 9-dash line and in terms of the South China Sea with some of the participants who are there within ASEAN itself. So that is something that again needs to be seen in terms of how the commercial agreement will work when the political understandings are slightly impacted. So that is something that we will need to see again. And in terms of again looking at how the markets in China are moving, again looking at the real estate, because that seems to be the biggest negative that they have at this moment. Five out of the top 40 major developers in China are not likely to make it through the year. So that is something that is a very negative prognosis. But then that is something that people are talking about, that they are going to have a very difficult time being able to sustain their operations. There is going to be, therefore, when we look at it in that respect, there's going to be an impact, a negative impact in terms of steel, iron ore, in terms of coking coal, and in terms of the overall financing that is happening in that particular sector, which will also be impacted in terms of the carbon commitments that China has made and the promise that they had made for blue skies for the Winter Olympics. So if that is going to happen, that means even the pollution factor comes down. And that again is going to be impacted because of the fact that a significant part of China's energy requirements are made through coal, thermal power requirements. So if that is
actually going to interesting you say that, I'm going to interrupt you there because in the past few weeks, we have noticed here in Australia that the production of urea from China has been shut down because they have shut down a lot of their coal plants, etc.
Yeah.
So that has caused a lot of global shortages in AdBlue and a few other chemical components. General Shankar, do you want to add before I pass it back to General Dua?
Yeah, you spoke of AUKUS and the security setup between India, Japan, and Australia.
And yeah.
Right. First and foremost, let's look at AUKUS. AUKUS is still an announcement. It is over the horizon. And my view is in the next 5 to 6 years, AUKUS might not be needed at all. Because the Chinese demographics, once it plays out, and once the aging factor of China starts showing up, like what has happened to Japan, the sociological factors will take over. Look, you can call China a superpower. We called China a superpower just 6 months back. 6 months down the line, you're talking a different tone altogether. And this is not a tone which only some people in India are talking. There's people in India talking. If I open New York Times, the guy Paul Krugman, who's an economist, he keeps talking. There's someone in South China Morning Post, he also talks. The figures match. Someone said, look, the figures we don't know whether they're plus 40% or minus 40%. But in this time at this point of time, these figures are eerily matching within a very close range. So the prognosis that China is going to go through economically difficult time for the rest of the year is probably correct. Add to the fact that whether Xi Jinping ascends to, he gets the third term or not, he has to consolidate his power. There is a fledgling opposition coming up, which I've never seen so far in the past 10 years in China. There might be factions, but they never came out in the open the way they're talking today. Right? You couldn't find an article which spoke against Xi Jinping 3 months back, but today it is there. So there is a problem.
Is it also because as the time draws near that he might be headed in or being cleared for the third term, which is unprecedented? So we did not see these things happening earlier because such things didn't happen.
Yeah, I agree with you.
That's another issue.
That's an issue. So there is a political, flux, and this political flux will take time to settle. It's not that tomorrow's Xi Jinping in now June, July, the 20th Congress takes over, he becomes a secretary and everything vanishes. By then, if the COVID situation goes bad and the economy goes bad, will he look at this thing or go across, to start fighting with others? That's the issue. In all this, as far as security is concerned, I'll reiterate. His first thing, if he has to go militarily against anyone, is Taiwan. Because Taiwan gives him the best payoffs economically, culturally, politically, from a nationalistic viewpoint, X, Y, Z. Right?
True.
So that is the criticality. If the world and the rest of the world can keep China off Taiwan, I think they would have achieved hell of a lot in 2022 and 23.
Thank you very much, sir, for that. I think we are now reaching the end of time. In fact, the end of extended time. So I think it all remains for me is to wrap it up. I am not going to be able to make any closing comments because after such good eloquent talks by three domain experts, I don't have much to say. And what we discussed today, I'll just take 1 minute to say what we discussed today. When we discussed what came out, is clearly, or what comes out is that things are not as good with China as somehow the world seems to make it. And over the last, whether it is the dissensions inside, whether it is their economy or several other policies of the government. But the fact also remains, as it came out repeatedly during our discussions and Q&A, that the fact that we are looking at China is the reason is that the world is wary of China's rise. We cannot be complacent that, okay, these are the problems that China faces, and thereafter and that is why all is well. I think the world needs to watch. That is why we are coming up with different groupings, alliances, and bilateral tussles are happening with several countries, and we've spoken between China and other countries, and then we've spoken of all of this. Last thing that I want to talk about is just mention in the passing is about our situation with China in Ladakh. And I have a nice comment from one of the ex-DGMO, General Bhatia has mentioned a comment to me, and I'm just going to read that out. And he commented when we were discussing about this, General Shankar and I, escalation control is with China, and why should he stop before achieving his political objectives? And he also doubts that even limited war is an option. We were discussing whether war is an option there, and he warns very correctly, but a spiraling effect can take place. Sometimes a small incident can get blown into a bigger incident, and then it may not be in anyone's control. So we have to be wary of that particular aspect. All in all, I have been really enriched by all these talks, questions, answers, and discussions. Thank you very much. My humble thanks to all the three panelists and all those who organized it. With that, it's a wrap for today's discussion, and thank you very much. I hand you back to General Gautam Murthy. Back to you, sir.
Thank you, Satish. Thank you all for a very fascinating discussion on China. The first webinar of CASA this year was on China, and I'm sure it will not be the last. Xi Jinping has said, we will never allow anyone, any organization, or any political party, anytime or in any form to separate any part of Chinese territory from China. Taking off from what General Shankar said towards the end in his closing remarks, therefore, will the US interfere if China takes over Taiwan militarily or politically, as they have done in Hong Kong? General Ashok Kumar today wrote in the Indian Express that under Xi, China has converted a territorial dispute into a sovereignty issue. How does India handle this? All this is going to play out in 2022, and I'm sure that we will soon have another webinar on China on particular aspects, as the situation is very dynamic and very dangerous, as well as crucial for the world. With these words, thank you, Professor Shrikant Kondapalli, Mr. Sunil Pant, and General P.R. Shankar for a fascinating discussion. Thank you, General Dua, for moderating this wonderful discussion. Thank you, Mahadev and Shankar, for your help, for your questions, and for putting it to the panelists. And last but not least, thanks to Badnali Shinga Roy, our technical assistant. And above all, thank you all the panelists and the attendees for sparing your valuable time on a Sunday evening to be with CASA on this webinar and attending it. We look forward to hearing your views, and we shall post a recording of this on CASA as well as a brief note on this. Thank you all very much. Good night and Jai Hind.